The country's state broadcaster says the country's army is once again meeting with President Robert Mugabe today to discuss him stepping down. Zimbabwe's ruling ZANU-PF party has also called an emergency meeting of the Central Committee this Sunday. It is expected the party will sack Mugabe and his wife, Grace. Impeachment is another possibility, but that process can only take place on Tuesday when Parliament reconvenes. Mugabe's been in power in Zimbabwe for nearly 40 years. Earlier this week, a military takeover put that into question. Zimbabweans have been awaiting word on what's next for the country, and rising tensions and rising calls for the 93-year-old president to step aside. Let's get you more now on that. I'm joined live from Harare by CGTN's Farai Mwakutsuya. Farai, what's the latest coming out of Zimbabwe? Is it the end of an era?
Beatrice, it is increasingly looking like that. I am at the ZANU-PF headquarters here in Harare, where that Central Committee meeting has just got underway. And the business of the day is to recall President Robert Mugabe as the leader of the party. The delegates who came here before they went into that meeting were speaking of how they woke up this morning and felt like they were in a completely different country, in a new country, following the events of yesterday. So it does look increasingly like that will happen. President Robert Mugabe's pillars of strength are slowly falling by the wayside. The party is no longer in support of him. His allies, the war veterans, also no longer in support of him. Parliament will look to impeach him next week, but the diplomatic avenue still remains open, and he will be engaged in those talks with the army later today. And we look forward to seeing what sort of resolution can be found. Again, people here looking for the quickest and most peaceful resolution, Beatrice.
It's been peaceful so far, Farai, and these marches at the weekend are considered rather unprecedented. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the sort of crowds that came out yesterday, those sheer numbers were an emphatic message, and read as an emphatic message and a sign that indeed people here no longer want President Robert Mugabe as their leader. But I think what is also quite significant is how the tide has turned against a leader who just over 2 weeks ago was in total control of his party, had fired his deputy, his wife was in line to be his next vice president, but things have turned. And I think it's a result of some pent-up building frustration and anger over the economic situation here. People facing hardships, people facing difficulties, policies that have basically put Zimbabwe in a very difficult place that people are unhappy about, and they all blame that and put it on President Robert Mugabe's doorstep. And yesterday was a message to try and say, look, we've had enough. That's what people were saying. They want him gone as soon as yesterday, is what many people were also saying yesterday, Beatrice.
Well, Farai, it's now going to be days of uncertainty. So what's next for Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans?
Well, what next is they now wait to see what happens. There is that meeting later today. We don't know what the outcome will be. There is this process underway by the ruling party, which will effectively, take power from President Robert Mugabe as the leader of ZANU-PF. If the parliamentary process on Tuesday proceeds and he is impeached at a state level, he is also hamstrung. So it will essentially leave him as a lame duck president and pave way for him to be forced to step down. And that is, I think, what we are likely to see in the coming days. It's now more of a matter of when and not if. That is the scenario we're in now. But many Zimbabweans saying, look, let's resolve this very quickly. Let's get a new leadership, if we are to get a new leadership in place, and let's start doing the things that will make our country great again. I think that is what most Zimbabweans are yearning for and looking forward to, Beatrice.
Right, Farai Mwakutsuya joining us there from Harare with the latest developments in Zimbabwe.